Tonight on Mississippi Insight, the Democratic National Convention, fully virtual amid COVID-19, how the Democrats did it different, and what to expect when the Republicans take their turn next week. Also, COVID-19 in college football, the new restrictions for fans when the season kicks off. Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week saw a first in U.S. presidential politics, a fully virtual Democratic convention. There were the typical speeches and roll call vote, but very little of it was done in person. How did it work, and what can we expect when the Republicans go next week? Joining us via Zoom is Dr. Nathan Shrader with Millsaps College, Assistant Professor of Political Science and Director of American Studies. And full disclosure, he was a delegate for Joe Biden. Dr. Shrader, you've been watching the convention. Give us your thoughts on the fully virtual part.
Well, look, the first ever fully virtual convention is definitely a departure from what we're used to. I consider myself as one of the classes that I teach. One is specifically in presidential elections as far as the process and the campaign structures go. I teach a separate course in political parties, which covers some of these things, and we've never seen anything quite like this before. This is so different because normally the convention speakers tend to feed on a live audience. So one of the things we've seen that's the biggest difference, other than not having the live audience, is the speeches are considerably shorter. And the most noticeable thing to me was Bill Clinton, who's known for over the years giving these extremely long, very well crafted but long convention speeches. He gave, I think, the shortest speech I've ever heard the man give. It seemed like it was a 5-minute talk. The candidates and the speakers seem to have adapted very well to this, because those drawn out long convention speeches that have big gaps in them for audience interaction and applause just makes for a long evening, because normally there are many more hours of televised convention. Here it has to be packaged in a way that viewers will watch and not turn off. And I think inadvertently, thanks to COVID, the Democrats and soon the Republicans will follow suit, may just have figured out what the future conventions look like, because we may end up with the more viewer-friendly conventions that are shorter in nature moving forward if both parties feel that this was beneficial for them getting their message across.
Vice President Biden accepted the nomination Thursday night. Your reaction to his speech?
I think there were a few things that went really well with this speech. And one of those points is that this convention has allowed for the Democratic Party to basically truncate these speeches into a far more manageable time block. Because one of the drawbacks of the traditional convention approach is the speeches take a very long time to deliver because you have the audience interaction. This was actually much better for a television or online audience. And I think what that allowed Joe Biden to do was simply be himself, and he could run through his speech without the interruption around him. And I was taken aback when I was watching the post-speech coverage last night on Fox News on cable, where you had Karl Rove saying how this was really an excellent speech, and Dana Perino, who is certainly, I would say, a very as close as you can get to being an outright Trump supporter, had said in her exact words were that Biden had, quote, just hit a home run in the bottom of the ninth. And so I think the reaction to this speech has been very positive. But what I'll add to it, though, is it really undermined, in my estimation, the Trump campaign narrative that Joe Biden is either incompetent or lacks the mental skills necessary to function in the job, because his speech was eloquently delivered. There were no errors or mistakes. I think the Republicans, maybe unintentionally, lowered the bar. And they neglected the fact that Joe Biden's a very good public speaker, and he's been doing this for 4 decades. And he didn't, this is something he's good at. And they hurt themselves in a way by lowering the bar and setting very low expectations for Joe Biden. So therefore, when he delivers an effective speech, even some of his normal critics, say on Fox, like Karl Rove and Dana Perino, were praising the effort.
We saw the former president, Barack Obama, taking on the incumbent Donald Trump by name, saying the future of our democracy is on the line. Were you surprised by his rhetoric? Is it a preview of what we might see in the coming weeks?
Yes, yes to it being a preview of what I think we're going to see in the coming weeks. Again, here's something that's just was very clear to me. The Biden and Harris speeches focused on Biden and Harris and their vision for the country. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, as well as Hillary Clinton and some others, they really fulfilled the role of the attack message, right, on Donald Trump. So it allowed the candidates themselves to project the positive nature of their message, and it allowed some very popular individuals like Michelle and Barack Obama to portray the other side of it. But we're going to, of course, see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris take on more elements of they're going to have to go after Donald Trump by name more often. But I think it was wise for the convention setting to let the very, very popular ex-president and his former first lady to take that role, which I didn't necessarily think they would do as easily as they did. And you could tell with both of their speeches, especially Michelle Obama's, that there was a lot of pent-up emotion there. It was almost like with Michelle Obama, even more so than her husband. And let me interrupt myself for a second. I think we're going to look back at this convention when we're teaching classes on presidential elections in the future, as I do. This is the year Michelle upstaged Barack, because I really do. His speech was excellent, but I think her speech was so candid and from the heart, and she was really the star of the convention in some aspects. But I think that it was wise to let them carry that message through this convention. Let the current ticket focus on their own biographies, their views for their vision of the country's future, and not just about Donald Trump.
We've heard from a number of Republicans like John Kasich and Colin Powell. Do you think the Democrats are making too much of a push for moderate Republicans and not focusing enough on their base, particularly when it comes to black voters? Because there's been some reports that Biden does not have the same number of black voters that Hillary had back in 2016 right now, the support.
So the short answer to that is no. And let me explain why. I think that there's a few things that we're seeing that let's look at Bernie Sanders first. Unlike Bernie Sanders' convention speech 4 years ago in Philadelphia, after he conceded the nomination to Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders did give a speech offering his support for her, but compare that to his speech on Monday night for Joe Biden. It was a full-throated endorsement, essentially begging his supporters, who may not have gone along with the Democratic nominee the last time, to rally to Biden this time. So that helps with the liberal Democratic base right there. In addition to that, to offset what you said about some moderate Republicans playing a key role, Senator Harris being chosen as the vice presidential nominee, that she is what I've been describing as a base nominee, a base choice. She has nearly 100% approval ratings by most of the liberal organizations that rate senators for their voting records. The labor unions, Planned Parenthood, organizations along along the lines of the funding public education, healthcare. Those organizations that are well regarded in the liberal community that would represent the base of the Democratic Party, they have Senator Harris too. And so when you have a noteworthy liberal running mate and you have the full-throated endorsement of your primary opponent who ran to your left, like Bernie Sanders, it leaves some wiggle room to include more moderate Republicans like John Kasich, Cindy McCain, General Powell. And I don't believe that having those moderate Republicans will hurt with the liberal Democratic base, because a true liberal Democrat from the Senate is on the ticket.
There was a lot of talk on the roll call, I guess seeing different parts of the country as they kind of bounced around. What did you think of that?
Well, I actually can tell you this, Byron. One of my favorite parts of any convention is the traditional roll call, where you go to they pan in the crowd to the delegation from those states, and they speak about something unique about their state and how their state votes. So the part I was actually thinking was going to be the least fun done this way was the roll call. At the end of the evening, I posted on my Facebook page that I found the roll call vote to be my favorite part of this entire process so far. The way they did that, zeroing in not just on some unique element of each state, but a person in that state standing in a unique place, giving a very, in our case, a Mississippi-centric view, and heck, the Rhode Island delegation were eating calamari. So it's like, this really was, I was thinking, oh, this isn't going to be as fun as the normal rowdy in-person roll call on the convention floor, but I really enjoyed that. And I hope the Republicans do something similar to that, because I felt that it really spotlighted the states and the people in them more so than just the politicians. This convention, I think you've got a historic number of people watching it streaming, because the Democratic Party, YouTube, Hulu, they're all streaming this thing. So I don't know if we're going to see those numbers reflected necessarily like in the TV ratings, but I think that we might be seeing this was almost a convention built for a younger audience, in the sense that younger people are used to the social media driven kind of applications. And these have been, again, short, truncated speeches, right to the point. And it moves from one thing to the next. So I do think that it's been effective from my perspective in terms of television programming.
You're a delegate. How did that process work?
Look, I can, now that I've done it, I can tell you a little more about it. I actually, when I was a freshman in college in Northwestern Pennsylvania in 2000, 20 years ago, ran for delegate and lost. And I've always wanted to do it. I've been watching the national convention since I was 11 years old. And starting in 1992, I watched them religiously, both parties, and watched the archived YouTubes and videos of the historic conventions. And I've always wanted to be a part of it. And I can tell you one of the ways this started is I just had found out in Mississippi, believe it or not, we have one of the most accessible and wide open systems you have anywhere in the country for if you want to be a national convention delegate. In other states, you have to pay filing fees, and you have to have petitions signed and circulated. In Mississippi, you file a single form, you don't pay a filing fee, and your name goes on a list. And if the presidential campaigns, they get the list and they narrow down how many slots they need to fill. And then you show up at your congressional district or state convention for your party, and your name's on the ballot, and you make a speech about yourself and why you want to do this, and the rest of the delegation votes. It's very candidate friendly. So if any of your viewers 4 years from now want to run to be a national delegate, Mississippi is fortunate to have an accessible, clear-cut system that's friendly for anybody that wants to try to run. And there were a ton of first-timers also this year, for both on the Democratic side for Joe Biden and for Bernie Sanders.
Much more with Dr. Shrader when we come back. How much is the Trump campaign paying attention to the convention, the Democratic convention, and what do you expect that do you expect they'll make any changes on what they've seen in the Democratic convention for their convention?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And you're starting to see a little bit of this trickle out online now. I would say that one of the things they are probably astutely watching for and taking notes on is the way this comes across as television programming, because it's not the traditional convention setting. This is a made-for-TV event. And Donald Trump, whether voters love him or hate him or somewhere in between, Donald Trump understands the television audience, and he understands that medium, right? This is the man who was, built up his reputation in part because of television, and he gets that. And I think he has an eye for that. So I think he's probably involved to some extent in trying to plan some of that behind the scenes, because he gets it. One thing that I believe was a very wise move from both Harris and Biden and their speechwriters is that they did not dwell on Donald Trump through their entire speeches. And there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, and as we're talking about what the Republicans' response may be, Donald Trump thrives on being the center of attention. And the Harris and Biden speechwriters, including the candidates themselves, they did not allow Donald Trump to be the front and center piece of their speeches. And so that, of course, is going to make Donald Trump's response interesting. I've not seen anything that he has said or tweeted thus far. But I do think the Republicans are going to have to step up their game for their convention next week. And I'm going to be curious to see what we see in Donald Trump, because there's a quote from Biden last night, the one that I think will stick in people's minds. And I've seen it retweeted over and over again, even by sort of non-political folks that I know. It is I will draw on the best of us, not the worst of us. I will be an ally of the light and darkness. I believe that was a intentional and clear contrast with Trump, who is running, if you remember his famous line from his inauguration address, the American carnage, right? It was done to draw that distinction. So Republicans next week will have two options. They're going to have to double down on kind of the message that I think Donald Trump's comfortable with, which is sort of an attack dog message that really hinges on sort of the negative aspects of American politics to anger people, or they're going to have to soften him a little bit to meet the moment to compare to Joe Biden's speech. And I'm not exactly sure what we're going to get, but I do know that Donald Trump himself is more comfortable in the first role, kind of playing the attack dog and hitting hard on the negative side. That's just his style, and it's hard to change that style in a 74-year-old man. That's just the way he approaches things.
How important will the presidential debates be this election season, and also the vice presidential debate?
Well, I think they're gonna. I think all the debates are always important, but let me connect this to something we talked about earlier, because I said voting is happening earlier for many people. The presidential debate commission schedule was not moved up for that, to reflect that. So the debates are still happening on the traditional time, but voting is happening sooner. So what that means is the debates may have less of an impact for some voters, because folks have frankly already voted or made up their minds, and their ballots are already in the mail. So again, what we have is the election calendar in terms of when people can vote in many places is moved up. The debate calendar didn't move up to match that. So they may not have the same impact.
It'll be an interesting time to see. All right, we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll be talking to you, I'm sure, many more times between now and November 3rd. Dr. Nathan Shrader, Millsaps College, thank you for joining us, and good luck for the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of the week.
Oh, thank you, Byron. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure talking to you. Tougaloo College President Dr. Carmen Walters represented Mississippi in the roll call that officially nominated Joe Biden. We spoke with her about the moment and her feelings on the convention.
Joe Biden had been here to our campus. I had met him. We talked about his plan for HBCUs. We were graciously excited that he visited Tougaloo. We had all of our students in place, and I think they just remembered that. But it has been absolutely wonderful. The response that we have gotten from around the country has been really, really wonderful.
When we come back, COVID-19 in college football. Governor Tate Reeves with some new restrictions for fans. No tailgates and fewer fans. That's the two big takeaways as Governor Reeves announces new rules for college football. Bowl seating is limited to no more than 25% of seating capacity, while maintaining 6 feet distance between households, club, and suite areas are also being limited. Everyone over the age of 6 must wear masks as they enter, exit, and throughout the stadium, unless they are seated. Game day events such as tailgating and rallies outside the stadiums are prohibited. Individuals allowed on the sidelines are limited to those essential for the game. Concession stands are open through grab-and-go food, and drink options are strongly encouraged. All transactions should be contactless and touchless, such as mobile ticketing and cashless concessions.
There will be unique limitations whether you are in bowl seating or club areas or in the suites. They each have different guidelines based upon whether you're in one of those three. I'd still rather be in the SEC with no tailgates than the Pac-12 or the Big Ten with no football.
Mississippi State and Ole Miss kick off their season on September 26th. And we'll be right back. Thanks to Dr. Nathan Shrader for joining us. Join us next week for another edition of Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Until then, make it a good night.